If we're not innovating, we're not standing still, we're moving backwards.
Who's going to be talking on innovation in education. Kyle is the director for Insight Online, and for the next 20 minutes, live from the podium, he'll be taking us through his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to Mr. Kyle Dodds.
All right, so just to start off, innovation in education, such a broad topic, but such an important one. And the first point I'm going to leave us with is that if we're not innovating, we're not standing still, we're moving backwards. It really is the case that if we're not pushing the boundaries and adapting to what we need to be doing in today's world, we really are moving backwards. And so I'm going to jump in today, here it goes, with just a little bit behind the scenes. We need to start from where we're coming from before we can go forward to say, where do we need to be, what's being done, and how are we going to do that? So I'm going to go through just a couple of themes to bring us back. Now, from an economic theme, we're going from a knowledge economy into an innovation economy. Now, this isn't one stopping and one starting. What this means is that we're coming from a space where we're selling our knowledge in a traditional sense, be it an engineer, an accountant, whatever the case may be. Now, I'm an engineer by trade, and we've moved into the education technology space, and so I might be a little biased, but I'll definitely throw us engineers out of the bus first then. And the real fact of the matter is that we are being pushed to no longer just sell our pure skills, but to sell our innovations, to sell what we can do with that skills. Because as we know, we've got world factors that are pushing us forward. Now, we've all heard enough about 4IR. We've all seen the world crises, and we know what social media is doing. So I'm not going to harp on about that. But the fact of the matter is that this is changing the way that we need to deploy our skills and to deploy our education. The reality is that someone working today, in 20 years, their job probably won't exist. And that's not to be scary. That's just the reality of education. We need to be able to adapt, and we need to be able to say that on an ongoing basis, we need to be able to upskill ourselves. Now, from an education trend, we've always relied on get your degree, go do that job for the rest of your life. That our worlds are vastly different from what's been in the past. If your company may not exist or your role may not exist in 5 years, how can your education carry you through that entire period? And so we need to adapt. We need to say, how are we going to take our education from our degree and continue to learning? And that's where we're going. So from an education delivery perspective, that's what I'm going to be focusing on a little bit more in the next 10 minutes. We're used to an in-person model, and we're used to the fact that people would deliver an in-person lecture and it would then be consumed by everyone. But the reality is that the way education has changed and the way we've been forced into a model of from in-person to suddenly online to going back to some sort of a blended approach is forced us to rethink the opportunities that we have and what is currently wrong and what can be done. So I'm just going to go into some of the key points. So some of the key points here is from an innovation perspective. So we've spoken about fourth industrial revolution at length. I think we've heard about it at length. And really now is that the reality is that we have to continue to upskill. As I've said, our jobs are going to be changing. Your skills that you have now, that job might not exist in 5 years, and absolutely you're going to need new skills to do it. A good example is just of working in a standard business world where we've gone from using Excel and Word for everything to tools coming out of our ears. From visualization to Power BI to data analytics, the set that you need is ever changing, and that software is ever changing. I mean, we barely have one social media platform for a couple of years. So if you're a marketing expert and you learned Facebook, tomorrow you need to learn TikTok. And the next day, who knows, that platform doesn't exist. So imagine learning a whole degree on skills that don't exist yet, and you need those skills. And so again, we need to understand that this is going to push us to change our education. So the reality is, again, that from a university's perspective, the top universities around the world have changed online learning from being a maybe or a nice to have to something that is a strategic part. Now, we're not saying that that's the only way it's to go, but it's to say that it is going that way, and we have to adapt to it and make sure that we get the best out of it, and we continue to look back and say, well, what really was valuable, and then keep that. And so access to limited, quality education. So there's a stat there which is to say 91% of global adults don't have a college degree or university degree. Now, for me, that stat is not troubling in the sense that a degree is not necessarily for everyone. For me, what the real note there is that access to quality education is for everyone. It may be in a different form. It may not look like a college degree, but access to it is critical. And these are the things that we can start to say that, when we look at schooling, when we look at corporates, they're all looking at these opportunities, and it's starting to happen and starting to be adapted. Now, when we start looking at this teaching in the future, I think it's a bit of a grim picture if we look at how we taught before and where we currently were with COVID. So how we taught before is that we had a model where we lectured in person, and I think we did it fairly well. Teachers were well prepped, and we were able to facilitate classes. But how could we retrieve that lesson in the class? You can't go back to your grade 5 science lesson. You can't go back to your grade 7. So what that means is that every single year, year after year, a teacher needs to give the exact same lesson, which is a poor use of time. They could give that one lesson the best they've ever done and spend the remaining time focusing and working with the learners where their personal time is valuable. And I'm not going to go through all of the items here, but things like spaced repetition. A teacher can't come back and back and back with examples because there's only limited times. We've got things like interleaving where we work lessons together where two subjects could potentially touch on one lesson and get value out of it in the same time. And so all of these things in person, what we really did was we did a standard lecture well, but we lost out on all of these opportunities. And rightfully so. There's only so much money, there's only so much time. If we move into how we taught in COVID, what we really did in COVID is we took traditional teaching and we did it worse. We lost the aspect of being in a class and being able to bump into each other and network and develop ancillary skills. We lost the ability to, make friends, engage in a conversation that you wouldn't just log off the meeting immediately as it ends. So we took traditional and we did it worse. That was COVID. It wasn't online teaching. It was doing a traditional teaching at a distance. So minus the good things and average at what we were doing. At least you couldn't get cut out from a connection in class. And so what I'm saying is that online learning is not how we've done learning in COVID. Online learning is taking the best of both worlds and really ending up with a blended approach. So as much as I come from a background delivering learning management systems and learning technology, what we're really proposing is blended learning. And what we're saying is that the ability to take the best of both worlds and really rethink what is possible. That's the future of learning. And that's where we're going to unlock potential of thousands of individuals. And so let's just quickly break down what I mean by that. We can do lectures where one person facilitates and 100 people have listened. We can do that well online. Granted that we've got a stable internet connection, which is rapidly improving around the world. We can do things like retrieval, which means that you can go back in any time and rewatch that lesson that was given. We can do things like spaced repetition with technology that where you might do an example. We know that even what I'm saying right now, 90% of you are not going to remember tomorrow. You need to learn things repetitively. And you can't have your teacher knocking on your door on Monday, Wednesday, next week, Monday, next week, Wednesday, say, did you remember that? Did you remember that? And as much as so, they've tried. Technology can do that. It's in our pockets. Right now, in 5 minutes, it can remind you of a couple of facts that you learned. And I promise you, if it does it 4 times in a row, you're going to remember. And these are just some of the examples that we can do so well. Faded examples is when it's actually more a psychology thing. If you picture someone riding a bike, so your parent will help you and they'll hold you and you'll slowly go. And then what happens is they touch you on the shoulder so you can feel it, but they're not quite there. And then suddenly they say, no, I'm holding the seat, don't worry. And then suddenly they let go and you're riding the bike. And so approaches like this happen as well in education. Now, again, this is impossible for one teacher to spend this with 30 people and do it. Never mind one lecturer with 300 students and do this. We can do this with technology, and we can make sure that the time that people are using is actually well spent. And so what we're saying is that we also acknowledge that there is such benefits to being together as a group, even being here today. You can sit in the middle row and have a laugh together. You wouldn't do that at Teams. You wouldn't. And I'm so glad that you are. These are the personal relationships that we can build in person. And we can do things like exploring together, team working, curiosity. Let's actually build it. Let's do it. And we learn so much from those experiences. And so let's just really rethink what online learning is. It's not online learning. It's facilitation of learning. And I'm just going to go through a quick key takeaways here. The purpose of education and training, it's really to develop an individual, but to develop their ability to innovate, develop them as a person that can then take control of their future and go into the world and affect it for good. That's not currently how we go about things, and we need to relook at things. And with technology and using the fantastic educators that we already have, we can bring these things together. To support the future that we're heading to, we need to make sure each and every one of us has the ability to adapt. If we don't have the ability to adapt, we're doomed not only as a nation, but as a society as a whole. We need to make sure that we can use these tools to support this ability. And again, using proper online learning principles, not Zoom call with a disconnect that no one attends and no one actually listens. Using proper engaging tools and taking innovative technology to apply it to both help the learner as well as the facilitator to deliver what they're doing. And really that's where it comes. Our basically facilitators, our lecturers and our teachers, their time is so precious. And for them to spend that time regurgitating things or doing admin is time wasted. That's where technology as a whole, it's not only about the facilitation, it's about the ecosystem of learning that needs to play its part so we can unlock their time to spend more one-on-one time with the learners and really get that engaging intellectual mind to be put to use, and not 5% of the time they're engaging people and 95% of the time they're trying to find which email got emailed to who and sifting through excuses of it was late because of this. We can't have that. And we shouldn't have that. We don't deserve to have that because we've got the technology to change things. But the point I want to leave with you is to say, if we're not innovating, we're not standing still, we're moving backwards. So let's innovate in education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for a fantastic presentation. I'm going to ask Simulation to step down. Can you come and join us?